Hi, my name is Owen Hale. I'm 36 years old, and I live in Copper Ridge, Colorado, a mountain town at about 8,000 feet that most people drive through on their way to somewhere else. We have one main street, a diner, a hardware store, a small library that's open 3 days a week, and a post office that doubles as the only place in town where you can reliably get a cell signal if you stand near the back wall. I've lived here my whole life. I manage the land and forestry for the county, which means I maintain the trails, clear the deadfall before it becomes a fire hazard, check the snowpack in winter, and make sure the old structures on public land don't collapse on anyone. It's not glamorous work. Most days it's just me and whatever the mountain decides to throw at me. But I know this land the way you know a person you've spent 36 years paying attention to. Every mood, every season, every way it has of telling you something's about to change. My life is simple. I get up at 5:30, earlier in fire season. I make coffee in the same blue enamel pot my mother left behind when she died. I drive the county roads in my truck, do what needs doing, come home, eat something, sleep. On Sundays, I have dinner with my neighbor Walt, 74 years old, who has opinions about everything and is usually right. That's more or less it. I don't say this with regret. I say it because it's true, and because the truth of it is what made everything that happened with Sera Mills so completely unexpected. She arrived on a Tuesday in late September, the kind of September day in Copper Ridge that looks like summer from the inside of a window and feels like November the moment you step outside. I was clearing a section of the main trail when I heard the sound of tires losing traction on the road below. Not a crash, just that particular skid. That means someone came into the first bend before the ridge too fast and hit the patch of black ice that forms there every year in the shade of the pines. I've pulled 6 vehicles out of that ditch in the last 5 years, every one of them in that same bend. I knew the sound before I heard it finish. I came down the slope and found a silver rental car sitting at a 45-degree angle with the passenger side wheels in the drainage ditch and the engine still running. The driver's door opened before I got there, and a woman got out, dark hair pulled back, city clothes, the specific expression of someone who has just done something they can't believe they did. She looked at the car, then at me. "I saw the sign," she said. "I thought I had more time." "Nobody has more time on that bend," I said. "Come October, it's ice by 9 in the morning." She looked at the car again. It wasn't badly stuck, just enough to need a tow. I got the chain from my truck, had it out in about 15 minutes. She stood to the side and watched without asking questions, which I appreciated. Most people either try to help in ways that don't help, or stand there explaining what happened, as if that changes anything. When I was done, I coiled the chain and she said, "Thank you. I didn't think anyone would come." "I was on the trail," I said. "I heard you go in. Is it always like this up here?" I looked at the road, at the ice patch, at the tree line, at the sky going gray over the ridge. "It gets worse," I said. "Where are you headed?" "Copper Ridge. I'm here for work. 3 months." She said it the way people say things they're still deciding how to feel about. "Road gets better past the bend," I said. "Worse again before town. Stay behind me." She blinked. "You don't have to. I know." I got in my truck and drove. She followed. Her name was Sera Mills. I found that out later, not from her directly, but from the county office, which had been fielding calls about the Whitfield development project for 6 weeks before she arrived. She was the lead architect on a proposal to build a resort complex on the northern end of the valley. 42 units, a lodge, a spa, a road that would need to be cut through a section of old-growth timber that I had been managing for 11 years. I'd known the project was coming. I hadn't known they were sending someone to live here for 3 months to oversee the survey and design phase. When I found out, 2 days after I pulled her car from the ditch, I drove out to the Whitfield site and stood at the edge of the timber section for a long time. The trees there are old, 80, 90 years, ponderosa pine mostly, with some old-growth Douglas fir along the creek. They don't look impressive the way a mountain looks impressive. They just stand there, quiet and certain, the way things that have been through a lot of weather tend to stand. I'd been fighting the Whitfield development through every county channel available for 8 months. Now the person sent to build it was staying in the Brennan cabin, half a mile from my house, and I had just personally towed her car to safety. I told myself it didn't change anything. The Brennan cabin sits on the south-facing slope above the main road. A good cabin, solid timber, with a porch that looks out over the valley and catches the afternoon sun even in October. Ruth Brennan rented it seasonally to people passing through. I'd fixed the porch railing twice, replaced a window last spring, and cleared the drive after every heavy snow for the last 4 years. I knew the place well. I didn't go over. I told myself there was no reason to. 3 days after she arrived, I was coming back from the upper trail on a Thursday evening, and I saw her standing on the porch in a coat that was not warm enough for a Copper Ridge October, looking out at the valley with both hands wrapped around a mug. The light was going fast, the way it goes in the mountains in fall, all at once, like someone turned a dial. She was watching it. I slowed without planning to. She looked over when she heard the truck. She didn't wave, just looked. I nodded. She nodded back. I drove on. That was the first time I noticed something I wasn't ready to name. The first real snow came on a Thursday night, 2 weeks after she arrived. I woke at 4 to the sound of it. The particular silence that means heavy accumulation, the kind that changes the shape of everything by morning. I drove the main road at first light to check the conditions, and I saw her car in the Brennan driveway, already half buried. I knocked at 7:30. She answered in a coat over her pajamas with a mug in her hand, and the expression of someone who had been awake for a while, watching something they weren't sure what to do with. "How much?" she said. 14 inches at the cabin elevation, I said. More on the upper slopes. She looked out past me at the road, at the white that had erased all the edges of everything and replaced them with a single clean surface. "It's quiet," she said. "Always is after a heavy snow. I've never heard anything like it." I looked at the road too. It was the particular silence she was talking about. Not emptiness, but presence. The mountain pressing in. "You get used to it," I said. "Or you don't. One or the other." She looked at me sideways. "Which is better?" "Getting used to it," I said. "The people who don't, they usually leave by February." She looked back at the snow. "I'm not leaving by February." I looked at her. She was watching the road with the expression she got sometimes. Focused, decided, the one that meant she'd made up her mind about something and the conversation was already over for her, even if I didn't know it yet. "Your car won't start in this without 15 minutes of warm-up," I said. "And the drive into town needs chains." "I have chains," she said. I looked at her. "You bought chains." "Wednesday, Cody at the hardware store helped me." She paused. I made a list. Something moved in my chest that I wasn't ready to examine. "All right," I said. "I'm going to need to learn to put them on," she said. "If that's something you could." "Saturday morning," I said. "Before the next system." She nodded. "Saturday." The next time I saw her was Saturday morning at the hardware store. She was standing in front of the weather stripping display with the specific expression of someone who has never bought weather stripping before but has decided they need it immediately. Walt's grandson Cody was behind the counter, 17 years old and deeply unhelpful about most things. "I came in for sandpaper. I didn't intend to say anything. The foam kind," I said from behind her. "Not the rubber. Rubber cracks in the cold. Foam holds." She turned around. Recognition, then something else. Something careful. "You're the one who pulled my car out." "Owen Hale. Sera Mills." She looked back at the display. "The cabin has a draft coming in under the front door. I can feel it when I'm working." "Threshold seal's probably gone," I said. "Old cabin. Happens every year before the first hard freeze." She looked at me. "Is there anything about this place that doesn't require preparation?" "Snow tires," I said. "You'll need those before November." She stared at me for a second. Then she laughed. Just a small one, surprised out of her. "Is that a warning or a threat?" "A warning," I said. "The threat comes when you try to drive on summer tires in November." She looked at the weather stripping, then back at me. "I don't suppose you'd tell me which one of these to actually buy." I picked up the foam roll and set it on the counter. "That one," she bought it. I bought my sandpaper. We walked out at the same time and stood for a moment in the cold morning air, not quite going our separate ways. "How bad does it get?" she said. "The winter." I looked at the sky, pale blue, clear, the kind of October clear that means the first real system is 2 weeks out, maybe 3. "Bad enough," I said, "if you're not ready for it." "Then teach me," she said. She said it lightly, half joking, the way you say things you mean but want to be able to take back. But it landed somewhere it wasn't supposed to land, and I think we both felt that. "Start with the weather stripping," I said. "I'll come by Tuesday and check the window seals." She looked at me. "You don't have to do that." "The Brennan cabin is county-adjacent property," I said. "I'd have to deal with a frozen pipe if something went wrong." It was true, it was also not the whole truth. She seemed to understand both of those things. "Tuesday," she said. I came by Tuesday. The weather stripping was installed, imperfectly but functionally, which was better than I'd expected. She'd also made a list, an actual written list of things she'd noticed that she didn't understand. The damper in the fireplace, the pressure gauge on the propane tank, the way the wind came from the northeast in the evenings and what that meant for the temperature drop. She handed it to me at the door like it was a document requiring review. I looked at it. "You made a list." "I'm an architect," she said. "I make lists for everything." "All right." I went through it item by item. 40 minutes. She took notes, in the same way she'd made the list, methodical, thorough, not embarrassed about not knowing things. I appreciated that. People who are embarrassed about not knowing things spend half their energy managing that embarrassment instead of just learning. When we were done, she made coffee, good coffee, which surprised me given she'd been buying the grocery store brand I'd seen in her car on Tuesday, and we sat at the kitchen table. The cabin looked different from the inside than I remembered it. She'd set up a drafting table near the south window with drawings spread across it and a good lamp angled over the work. The rest of the cabin looked like hers, a few books, a pair of trail runners by the door that had already seen mud, a jacket hung on the peg by the window that was significantly warmer than the one she'd been wearing on the porch. She'd been learning, quietly, methodically. "You grew up here," she said, not a question. "Born here, never left for more than a month." "What's a month?" "My mother got sick when I was 24. I drove to Denver to help settle some things after she passed. Came back as soon as I could." She looked at her coffee. "I'm sorry about your mother." 5 years ago," I said. "It gets easier." "Does it?" I looked at the window. The pines on the ridge were moving. A slow, heavy movement that meant the wind was picking up from the northeast the way it always did in the afternoons this time of year. "It changes," I said. "Not easier exactly. More like you get used to carrying it." She nodded. She didn't push, and she didn't offer anything in return, which I noticed. Most people, when you say something real, feel obligated to match it with something real of their own. She just listened. Let it be what it was. We talked for another 20 minutes about nothing important, the trail system, the wildlife patterns in fall, the way the valley looked in the first snow. I left before it got dark. Walt met her on a Sunday in October. Accidentally, in the way things happen in Copper Ridge, which is to say not accidentally at all. He showed up at my house for dinner, and she was there because she'd stopped by to return a book she'd borrowed, and stayed because Walt arrived before she could leave. And Walt doesn't let people leave easily. He talked for 40 minutes about the history of the valley, about the original timber operations, the mining that came after, the 2 decades of relative quiet before development money started coming back in. He talked about the creek and the fires and the winter of 1993 that closed the main road for 11 days. He talked about all of it with the particular authority of someone who has been watching a place long enough to understand its patterns. Sera listened. She asked questions. Good ones, the kind that showed she'd been listening to more than just the words. She asked about the creek levels in dry years. She asked about the fire corridor in the eastern section. She asked about the old survey maps that predated the county records. Walt told me afterward, in his way, that she understood things. "She sees what's underneath," he said. He meant it as a high compliment, the highest he gave. Coming from Walt, it was about the highest there was. I didn't say anything. But I thought about it for the rest of the week, about the way she'd stood at the edge of the timber section with the morning light coming through the firs and gone completely still, about the way she read the county maps like she was reading something that had been waiting to tell her something, about the way she asked questions that assumed the land had a logic to it, not just a use. She sees what's underneath. I knew something about that. I spent the next week telling myself that the project she was here to build was a problem I needed to keep separate from whatever was happening when I sat at her kitchen table. I was good at separating things. I'd spent 8 years maintaining county land that people wanted to develop, and I'd learned to be methodical about it, to keep the professional and the personal in their own lanes and not let one contaminate the other. But the project was moving forward. The survey team had been on site 3 days that week. I'd driven past and seen the flags, bright orange plastic, staked in the ground along the edge of the timber section. Every flag was a tree they were planning to take. I knew the ground there well enough to know which flag went where. I knew which ones were the Douglas firs along the creek. On Friday, I filed a formal objection with the county environmental office. Standard procedure. I'd done it 3 times already in the last year on various aspects of the Whitfield proposal. The objection cited the old-growth timber survey I'd commissioned 6 months earlier and the creek corridor protections that should have triggered a separate environmental review. I didn't tell Sera. I told myself that was the right call. She was here to do her job. I was here to do mine. The fact that we'd had coffee twice didn't change the geometry of the situation. Then on Saturday she knocked on my door. I heard the knock and opened it, and she was standing on my porch in the good jacket, the warm one, with her hands in her pockets and an expression I hadn't seen on her before. Not the careful professional one, not the one she used when she was asking practical questions about propane tanks. Something more direct. Something that had made a decision before she got here. "You filed an objection," she said. "I did. On the timber section, yes." She looked at me for a long moment. The wind was moving the pines behind her, and the sky was the particular flat gray of a system coming in from the northwest. 3, maybe 4 hours out. I could smell the snow in it already. "Were you going to tell me?" she said. "It's county procedure," I said. "Public record." "That's not what I asked." I stepped back from the door. "Come inside. There's weather coming." She came in. She sat at my kitchen table, the same way she sat at hers, straight-backed, both hands on the table. And she looked at the county maps I had spread out from the morning's work. She'd seen maps like these before. She knew how to read them. She found the timber section without me pointing to it. She put her finger on it and looked up. "How old?" she said. "The Douglas firs along the creek. 80 years minimum. Some of them older." She looked at the map. "The road alignment goes right through them." "Yes, the original survey didn't flag them as significant." "The original survey was done in August," I said. "In August this section looks like standard mixed timber. The firs don't differentiate clearly from the air until the deciduous understory drops. The county survey I commissioned was done in November, on the ground." She was quiet. She kept looking at the map. "I've been filing objections on this project for 8 months, before you got here, before I knew who was coming." "Before you got here, before I knew who was coming." She nodded slowly. I could see her processing it, the professional version and the personal version running alongside each other, trying to find where they intersected. "I didn't come here to destroy anything," she said finally. "I know that," I said. "But I was given a brief, a site, a timeline. I know that too." She looked at the map one more time, at the flags I'd marked in red along the creek corridor, at the trees I'd been watching for 11 years. "Show me," she said. "Take me out there. I want to see it." We drove out the next morning, Sunday, early, before the survey team came in. The snow from the night before had dusted the higher elevations, and the air was clean and cold and perfectly still. I parked at the trailhead, and we walked in on the service road, about 1.5 miles to the creek section. She didn't talk much on the walk in. She wore the right boots this time. She'd gone to the outfitter in town the week before. I'd heard from Walt, and she walked like someone paying attention, not like someone walking to get somewhere. When we reached the creek, the Douglas firs were there the way they always were, standing in the particular silence of old trees, which is different from the silence of everything else. You feel it before you hear it. The creek was running low but clear, the way it ran in October before the snowpack built up. She stopped. She stood at the edge of the corridor and looked up through the canopy and didn't say anything for a long time. The light was coming through at a low angle, October morning light, gold and thin, and it caught the texture of the bark and made the whole corridor look like something from a long time ago. "How did this not come up in the original survey?" she said finally. "It did," I said. "It was classified as manageable impact. Someone decided 80 years wasn't significant." She turned and looked at me. "Who?" "The consultant the developer hired." She looked back at the trees. She was quiet for a long time. I watched her face, not obviously, just from the corner of my attention, and I saw something working in it. The professional and the personal finding their level. "If I redesign the road alignment," she said slowly, "it adds cost. It adds time. Marcus will push back." "Marcus Webb," I said. "The development partner. He flew in last week. He wants this on schedule." She paused. "He'll come back." "He will," I said. "That's what people like Marcus do." She looked at the firs one more time, at the creek, at the way the morning light was doing what it did, unhurried, certain, entirely indifferent to timelines. "I need to think," she said. "Take your time," I said. "The trees aren't going anywhere." She looked at me then, a full look, the kind that doesn't happen accidentally. And something in it was different from all the times before. More settled, like she'd been deciding something since she knocked on my door and had just now finished deciding. We walked back in the same quiet we'd come in. Marcus Webb arrived on a Wednesday, 3 weeks after Sera had walked into those trees and stood there in the morning light. He came in a company SUV with 2 colleagues and the specific energy of a man who considers his time more valuable than other people's and wants them to feel that. I met him once, briefly, at the county office when he stopped in to check on the objection status. He was 50-something, silver-haired, the kind of good-looking that's mostly about grooming and posture. He shook my hand with the firm grip of someone who has been told that firm grips matter, and looked at me with the pleasant expression of someone who has already categorized me as an obstacle. "You're the one filing the objections," he said. "I'm the county land manager," I said. "It's my job." "Of course," he smiled. "We're hoping to resolve this in a way that works for everyone." "I'm hoping that too," I said. What I heard from Walt, who heard it from Ruth Brennan, who had seen Marcus's SUV at the cabin twice that week, was that Marcus was pushing Sera hard on the timeline. The redesigned road alignment she'd proposed added 6 weeks to the schedule and a significant cost overrun. Marcus wanted the original alignment reinstated. He was willing to make accommodations, some additional planting, a wildlife corridor on paper, but he wanted the firs. I heard this on a Thursday evening. I drove out to the timber section on Friday morning and stood at the creek for a while. Then I drove to the county environmental office and filed a request for an emergency designation review on the old-growth corridor, a process that, if successful, would trigger a mandatory 60-day hold on any construction in the section. It was the strongest procedural move I had left. I'd been saving it, waiting until the right moment, until I had the survey data solid enough that the review would hold. I had that now. I filed it on a Friday and I told no one. There was a week in November, after Marcus had gone and the designation review was in process, where the weather closed in and we were both working from inside, and the town got very quiet the way it gets when a system parks over the ridge and doesn't move for days. I ran into her at the diner every morning. We ate at separate tables the first day. The second day she sat across from me without asking, and we both read things on our phones and didn't talk much, and it was the most comfortable I'd been in a restaurant in years. On the third day she brought a drafting pad. She spread it on the table between us and showed me what she'd been working on, the redesign, not the Whitfield project as it had been conceived, but something different, smaller. The road alignment following the natural contour of the land instead of cutting across it. The structures set back from the creek corridor. The footprint half what the original proposal had called for. It's not what Marcus wanted, she said. No, I said, but it could work. It could be something that, she paused, something that belongs here instead of being placed on top of it. I looked at the drawings. They were good, genuinely good, in a way that surprised me, not because I doubted her capability, but because of how differently they felt from the original proposal. These drawings had looked at the land first. They'd started with what was there. You redrew the whole thing, I said. 3 times. She looked at the pad. The first 2 times I was still trying to make Marcus's version work. The 3rd time I stopped trying to make it into something it wasn't. I looked at the creek corridor she'd preserved. In the drawing, the exact line of the Douglas firs, given their space, built around instead of through. This is the version worth fighting for, I said. She looked at me for a moment. You think it could get approved? With the designation in place, yes. It would take time. It would need the right people behind it. I paused. But yes. She looked back at the drawings. Something settled in her face, the particular quiet of someone who has been carrying a decision and has just found out the ground is solid enough to set it down. Then I'm going to finish it, she said. On Saturday morning, Sera knocked on my door again. She came in without waiting to be asked and sat at the kitchen table and put her hands flat on the surface and looked at me. Marcus wants me to sign off on the original alignment by Monday, she said. I looked at her. What did you tell him? I told him I needed the weekend. She paused. He told me that the project was more important than one section of trees, that the economic benefit to the region. She stopped. He made it sound reasonable. He's very good at making things sound reasonable. I know the type, I said. Owen. Her voice changed, lower, quieter. I keep going back to that morning, the light, the way those trees just stood there, like they'd been standing there since before anyone had any plans for them. I didn't say anything. I know this is my job, she said. I know I came here to build something, but I've been an architect for 6 years and I've never... She stopped again. I've never stood in a place and understood so clearly that building something there would be wrong. I looked at my coffee. I filed for an emergency designation review on Friday, I said. Old growth corridor. If it's approved, 60-day mandatory hold, minimum. She looked at me. You didn't tell me. No. Why? I thought about that, because I didn't want you to feel like I was using you, I said. I've been fighting this project for 8 months. You didn't need to feel like this. I stopped. Like you were part of that. She was quiet for a long time. The fire was going. I'd built it that morning before the light came. And the cabin was warm, and the sound of the wind outside was the particular sound of the first real system of the season. It had been building since Thursday. What am I part of then? She said, very quietly, not looking for a fight, just asking. I looked at her. She was sitting at my table with her hands flat on the surface and her eyes on me, and she looked nothing like the woman who had slid off the road 3 weeks ago in a rental car that wasn't ready for a Copper Ridge October. She looked like someone who had been paying attention, who had learned the weather and the wood and the way things worked up here, one careful step at a time. Something I didn't plan for, I said. She held my eyes. Then she reached across the table and put her hand over mine. Not dramatically. Just put it there like it was the simplest thing. The emergency review, she said. Is it solid? Solid enough, I said. Then Marcus can wait until Monday, and I'm going to tell him the alignment doesn't work. Not because of the objection, because it's wrong. I looked at her hand on mine. He won't take that well. He'll be fine, she said. Men like Marcus always find another project. She called Marcus on Sunday afternoon. I wasn't there for it. She made the call from the cabin and told me about it that evening. Sitting on my porch in the last of the daylight with a blanket around her shoulders and her coffee going cold in her hands. She said he'd been exactly what she'd expected. Controlled, disappointed, the specific cold politeness of a man who has decided to file your name away for later. He'd ended the call by saying the project would continue with or without her final sign-off, that the company had options, He said that like it was a threat, she said. Was it? Probably. She looked at the valley. The first snow of the season was on the upper ridges, a thin line of white against the gray-blue of the late afternoon sky. But the emergency review is real. The 60-day hold buys time. And once it's in the system, once there's a formal record of the old-growth designation, it gets a lot harder to just push through. That was the idea, I said. She looked at me sideways. You've been doing this for 8 months. Yes. And you pulled my car out of a ditch and taught me how to buy weather stripping. The two things aren't related, I said. She almost smiled. Owen, they're not. You showed up, she said quietly. Both times. For different reasons. But you showed up. I didn't have an answer for that. I looked at the ridge, at the snow line, at the way the light was going down behind the mountain, the way it always went down. Fast and final and beautiful. It's going to snow tonight, I said. I know, she said. I checked the forecast. I looked at her. She was still watching the ridge, her profile in the failing light, the blanket pulled around her shoulders, the cold air making her cheeks pink. She looked like someone who had stopped being a visitor and hadn't quite registered it yet, or had registered it and was still deciding what to call it. You're going to need firewood, I said. Cabin goes through half a cord in a hard week. I know, she said again. I ordered it on Thursday. I looked back at the ridge. After a while she said, I'm not going back to Denver at the end of 3 months. I kept looking at the ridge. I talked to Ruth this week, she said, about extending the lease. She said she'd think about it. Ruth always says she'll think about it, I said. She means yes. Sera turned and looked at me. A full look. The kind that had nothing careful left in it. I want to stay, she said. She stopped. I don't know how to do this, she said. I'm better with structures than with. So am I said. She smiled, just a little. The real one, the one that showed up without warning and made everything in the room feel different. I reached over and took her hand. Her fingers were cold from the coffee cup. I held on anyway. That was 2 months ago now. The emergency designation review was approved in November. The old-growth corridor along the creek is formally protected, which means the original road alignment is off the table permanently. The Whitfield project is on hold while the developer reconsiders the whole proposal. Marcus Webb has not called Sera since October. She told me this without bitterness, just as a fact, the way she delivered most things that were done and settled. She's still in the Brennan cabin. Ruth extended the lease through the spring, and I have a feeling, though neither of us has said it directly, that it will get extended again after that. She's been working on a redesign of the resort proposal on her own terms. Smaller, lighter on the land, using the natural topography instead of fighting it. She showed me the preliminary drawings last week, spread across her drafting table in the south window light. They were good, better than good. They looked like they belonged to the place instead of being imposed on it. She's learned the winter, not all of it. You don't learn a Copper Ridge winter in one season, but the important parts. She knows what the sky looks like before a system comes in. She keeps the wood stacked right. She drives like someone who has made peace with ice. Walt has had her to dinner twice and told me afterward, in the specific understated way Walt tells you things that matter, that she's good people. On Friday nights we eat at the diner. Sera orders the soup and then eats half my pie without acknowledging it, which I've decided is just how she operates, and I've stopped mentioning it. I sit across from her and watch the room the way I always have, and she reads things on her phone that she tells me about in pieces, the way she tells me most things, a piece at a time, testing to see if I'm listening. I'm always listening. Last week we were coming back from the upper trail. I'd taken her up to see the Douglas firs in the first real snow, which is something I've been doing alone for 11 years, and she stopped at the edge of the corridor and looked up through the canopy. The snow was coming down light and straight, the way it comes down in the mountains when the air is still, and the firs were dark against it and entirely themselves. She stood there for a long time. They made it, she said finally. They were always going to make it, I said. She looked at me. You didn't know that? No, I said. but I wasn't going to stop until they did. She took my hand. The snow kept falling. The trees stood the way they'd been standing for 80 years, quiet, certain, entirely indifferent to anyone's timeline but their own. I thought about what I'd said to her that first morning at the hardware store. You won't last a week. I hadn't meant it cruelly, just as a fact, the way most things I said were just facts. But I'd been wrong, not about the winter, which was every bit as hard as I'd warned her, about her. She'd lasted, she'd learned, she'd stood in the morning light among the old trees and understood something that a lot of people never understand. That some things are worth fighting for not because of what they give you, but because of what they are. She turned back to the trees. Her breath made small clouds in the cold air. You told me I wouldn't last a week, she said. I know, I said. She looked at me over her shoulder, that small, certain smile. Good thing I'm not leaving then. The snow fell. The trees stood. I held on.